Millions of men are at war. You're trying to win, but you're the leader of just a few hundred disorganized tribesmen. What can you do for the war effort? Well, you can try sabotage. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the British had yet another success at the Battle of Passchendaele, as well as a success on the Euphrates. The other fronts were relatively quiet, though of course the day-to-day fighting continued most everywhere unabated. And we saw some of that day-to-day fighting this week in the Middle East. Lawrence of Arabia, an Algerian-French officer named Rosario Pisani, and around 100 Bedouin tribesmen set off to sabotage the Hejaz Railway, armed with an electric mine and a pressure mine. That railway was of major importance to the Ottomans for transporting troops and supplies around the region. On the 3rd, Lawrence buried the pressure mine south of Shaidia station. No trains appeared for 2 days, but a water train passing on the 5th did not set off the mine. So at midday, when he assumed the railway guards were taking a siesta, Lawrence crept forward and laid the electric mine by the pressure one. This was under one of the 3 bridges there. At 8 a.m. on the 6th, a train arrived from the north, and the mines were detonated when the locomotive was crossing the bridge. The explosion was enormous, and the locomotive was destroyed. 20 passengers in the first carriage were killed, and the carriages themselves were decoupled and began to roll back down the hill. The Turkish guards came out of their blockhouses, and Lawrence and company got out of there. As a result of this, the locomotive drivers went on strike, and for passengers that still wished to ride the railway, in spite of the numerous sabotage incidents, seats at the rear of the train could be bought at premium prices. The sabotage was working. And there was other news from the Middle East this week. In Palestine, the Ottoman secret police had broken up the Jewish spy ring that worked for the British and arrested Sarah Aronson, one of its leaders. She was tortured for 4 days but gave no information. She killed herself October 5th. The British government had, by this time, began to consider the idea of replacing Turkish rule in Palestine with a Zionist state under British control. On the 2nd, they learned of a meeting in Berlin where the Germans and Ottomans made plans to offer European Jews a German-sponsored national home in Palestine. But the machinations behind the lines took a backseat to the ones in the field. At Passchendaele, British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig thought they were about to break through the German lines and the cavalry could finally come in. His generals Herbert Plumer and Hugh Gough weren't so certain and expressed themselves to him about this. They thought the high ground needed to be secured before any big advances could happen, and this would take a few more bite and hold grabs of 1 to 2 kilometers each. This was a new tactic Plumer had come up with, which we saw the past 2 weeks, to counter the deep German elastic defense system. After each grab, though, you had to build roads and all to bring up the artillery, and that took time. Haig sat the generals down October 2nd and told them they were wrong. The breakthrough was soon to come. I want to quote Nick Lloyd here from Passchendaele about Gough and Plumer, right? They had seen this before, a limited success that had been based on exhaustive preparations and phenomenal firepower, causing Haig to find new faith in dramatic breakthrough operations. As they already knew, it was best to nod in agreement and get on with the job at hand. The Germans, for their part, resorted to old tactics to try and beat Plumer since the new ones didn't work, loading the forward positions so that attackers couldn't make even little land grabs. It was drizzling rain at 6 a.m. on October 4th when Plumer's 2nd Army launched the Battle of Bloedseinde, with 1st and 2nd Anzac Corps making the main assault against Bloedseinde Ridge. The whole frontage was around 1 kilometer wide. This turned out to be even more of a disaster for the Germans than September 20th or 26th had been. The men in the front positions were annihilated by the artillery barrage, which came with such intensity that it truly was a wall of fire. In addition, the German reserves had been placed too far forward and were also hard hit. The battle was, for all intents and purposes, over by the early afternoon. The British had advanced between 700 meters and 1 kilometer, depending which source you believe, and then, once again, stopped and dug in. They had inflicted 30,000 casualties on the Germans, though they'd taken 25,000 themselves, even after destroying the forward German positions. Well, there was still another 500 meters of killing zone to tackle. This was pretty painful for the British, but totally unsustainable for the Germans. What would they do? German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff searched for some way to launch an offensive that would draw British troops away from the region, but came up with nothing. Ludendorff ordered his men to switch back to the flexible defense, which at least would keep most of them out of range of British artillery. He was seriously worried at this point. I myself was put to a terrible strain. The state of affairs in the West appeared to prevent the execution of our plans elsewhere. Our wastage had been so high as to cause grave misgivings and had exceeded all expectations. He even wondered how much ground could be given up without endangering U-boat bases on the Belgian coast. So, as distant as they may have once seemed, Haig's objectives were now an actual possibility. The Battle of Bloodzijde was even called the greatest victory of the war in some British press. But there are different opinions as to the scale of success. The autumn rains hadn't come down yet, almost miraculously, but they would, and the ground now, in front of the British, was low-lying and would flood in any rainfall and become tough to cross. This had been an issue last year at the Battle of the Somme, when the British had given up high ground to advance onto and be forced to defend lower ground. Still, it was undeniable that Plumer's forces had made headway, and they had seriously rattled the opposition. The German official history would call this a big British success, and would note the drop in German morale once they realized that they could not hold their ground against overwhelming British artillery. Haig called for the next attack to come October 8th, 2 days earlier than planned. He was determined to take Passchendaele. General John Charteris, Haig's chief of intelligence, looked at the enormous casualties of the past few weeks, though, and wrote on the 5th that they should stop for the winter. Plans, however, were finally drawn up for 3 new assaults to take place the 9th, 12th, and 14th. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George and others felt it was this week that Haig lost all sympathy. The Battle of Passchendaele was 2 months old. Gains had been made, sure, but they were modest and the losses were high. Winter was coming early, and Haig was ordering further attacks. And it looked like the Germans would be making some further attacks of their own, far to the northeast. On October 2nd, the Russian fleet refused to obey the Russian provisional government, so the Germans could execute plans to land on the islands in the Gulf of Riga. Operation Albion would take the islands in the Estonian archipelago, which the Germans believed would allow them to outflank the Russian army and move on Petrograd, the Russian capital. At the moment, they were trying to subdue the coastal batteries and clear the extensive network of mines. If successful, a land invasion would follow. And here are a few notes to end the week. On the 29th and 30th, Italian attacks on the Bayansitsa Plateau take 2,000 Austrian prisoners. On the 30th, Sun Yat-sen was arrested at Canton for organizing revolution. That same day, a Congress at Kiev demands independence for all Russian nationalities. On October 1st, British naval airplanes bombed Beirut harbor. And on October 2nd, HMS Drake was torpedoed off the Irish coast. 19 men were killed. The Drake was an armored cruiser that had a checkered career, including time serving as flagship of the Australia station. And the week ends with yet another Allied success at Passchendaele, skirmishing in Italy, a Russian mutiny in the Baltic, and sabotage in the Middle East. But would the British successes continue in Belgium? The Germans were certainly worried by now, as they were slowly being forced from their vaunted defenses. But winter had come early, and the weather had turned bad, and that ground easily flooded. Perhaps success had gone to Haig's head, but perhaps his dreams of breakthrough were really just about to come true in the 3 battles scheduled for next week. And remember, the thing about Haig's dreams of breakthrough, he only had to be right once. If you want to learn more about Sir Douglas Haig, the commander of the British Army, you can click right here for our bio special about him. Our Patreon supporter of the week is Psych. Is that his legal name? We live in marvelous times. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.